Good morning, everyone. My task is simple, and it's to bring the findings of the report that we did. This thing is misbehaving. Oh, okay. Thank you. It's working. So we looked at the gender representation in the Kenyan media. And I'll probably take 10, maximum 15 minutes in actually trying to condense the findings, because we actually have the report, but what I'll do is to just pick out a few highlights which would probably form the basis of our discussion this morning. So our objectives, which one was to establish actually the level of awareness of journalists on important legal and policy gender documents within the representative media houses. The second one was to find out the existence of gender policy and strategies within the media houses in Kenya. And the third was to suggest mechanisms and structures needed for fair representation of both men and women in the media. And the methodology that we actually adopted, we did a hybrid where we used both qualitative and quantitative, which was entirely meant to actually uncover the trends and underlying gender issues in the Kenyan media. And we are saying that one of the research methods that we used was media monitoring, content analysis, and which we are competent to do as Media Council, because we have, we monitor over 70 radio stations and probably now more than 12 TV stations in the country. So we also used questionnaires and in-depth interviews across the country. We visited journalists and actually wanted to ask what their views were, because we also, this study also included community radio stations and regional-based radio stations. So the findings, these are the findings. Number one, globally, women hold approximately 40% of paid employment, while a large proportion on work in the information sector, particularly in Global South context. This is I got from the Global Media Monitoring Project. It does continuous media monitoring. And what we actually found out is the findings in our study are in tandem with the findings of the study that they do. The longitudinal study they've done since 1995. They issue periodic findings in a period of 5 years. So after every 5 years, they issue findings. And we actually realized that the findings of our study were in tandem with their findings, which was very interesting. So in the world, depicted in the news, only 20% of the total workers in the formal labor force are women, while 67% of the unemployed and stay-at-home parents are women. This is just global findings. So in 2015, progress towards news representation that acknowledge women's participation in economic life remains elusive. So this is just the overall findings of that report. Now, what were our findings as Media Council of Kenya? We were trying to find out where are stereotypes pushed, in which segments, in which format of news stories. Is it in news? Is it in commercials? Is it in advertising? Is it in feature stories? And any other that journalists could specify. And from our findings, you realize that majority of stereotypes are found in advertising and commercials, followed by news reports, probably because of skewed perspective that some journalists have in their reporting. And then feature stories came in tow. So you realize that commercials and advertising have actually a high percentage of stereotypes when it comes to representation of women. So in 2015, women make up to 24% of the persons heard, read about, or seen in newspapers, television, and radio news, exactly as they did in 2010. I borrowed that from that finding. Another finding, we actually wanted to find out of the legislation touching on gender issues, which one was top of mind. We were trying to actually look at the level of awareness. We have the Sexual Offensive Act of 2006. You can see the figures in terms of level of awareness. We have the National Cohesion and Integration Act. All of these legislation and regulation have an element of gender in terms of trying to bring out that balance. If you look at the Employment Act of 2007, it has gender issues. The third Gender Amendment Bill. We have the National Gender Equality Act, the Article 327, Section 3 of the Constitution of Kenya. All this legislation has touched on gender issues in one way or another. So we were asking journalists, are you aware of, what is your level of awareness of any of these legislation? Because you can actually never know your rights if you don't know the legislation. Is that true? So we are actually trying to find out their level of awareness, and you can actually see. So only 9% of the stories contains reference to legal rights or policy frameworks. So this is actually similar to what the Gender Media Monitoring Project found out. So meaning that few of our journalists are actually expounding on gender issues through their stories. Okay? We also found out that majority, that 62% of the articles in newspapers analyzed during the period were written by men. So I'm not sure whether men are deliberately willing to represent women issues. If women leave all the stories to be written by men, I wonder how that whether fair representation will be achieved. We also realize that women as news reporters are most present on radio at 41%. And the least in print news at 35%. So I don't know whether women would love to hide behind radio, or because you'll actually see the findings when it comes to TV. We also found out that 75% of journalists interviewed observed that men and women are not fairly represented. They know. So according to them, Kenyan media is male-dominated, and further, the findings showed that men were 10 times more likely to be news sources and actors. So I don't know what happened. One of the in the articles of the Code of Conduct states that gender representation in terms of balancing views in an article is important. So when you do a story, you find the perspective of a male and you find the perspective of a female. That makes you achieve a fair and a balanced story, even in terms of representation, of perspective. We also found out that 62% of journalists in Kenya media were not aware of gender policy. It relates to our findings on legislation, okay? So they are not aware of any gender policy or strategies and even networks in their workplaces. So we were asking journalists, do you have gender policies in your media houses? And unfortunately, some of the media, apart from the big media houses, the small media houses do not have any gender policy. So 72% of the journalists interviewed indicated that media do not have any gender awareness workshops. So basically on a day-to-day basis, journalists report to work, given the assignment, and they go to work, and there is no concerted efforts to ensure that they understand issues on gender. This is our findings. Approximately, this is very interesting, approximately 59% of students who graduate from Kenyan universities are women. While from our database, approximately 66% of credited journalists are women. Men, sorry. My apologies, sorry. What we did, we took the accredited journalists and we were trying to see whether they are male or female, and we could do that. And we actually wrote to some of the Kenyan universities and told them to send us the ratio of men to women who graduate. And so we were wondering, where do women, female journalists, after graduation, where do they disappear to? The findings further show existence of wide gender inequalities within the media sector in Kenya. And these wide inequalities are caused by lack of gender policy that even guide what? Recruitment. So we actually found out that the invisibility of women journalists in traditional media, this is what we call mainstream media, has crossed over to the digital news delivery platforms. So you realize that globally, only 26% of the people in internet news stories and media news tweets combined are what? Are women. So the kind of inequality that is represented in the media, mainstream media, has actually been translated to what? The digital platform. So the media working condition favors men, not women. That's what the respondent says. So, for example, flexibility of women breastfeeding at the workplace. You know, they are not given that privacy. And this influences their work. I don't know, probably because they are not given that element. They are unstable, you know. Maybe you have a young baby as a woman and, you know, there is no newsroom that offers a breastfeeding section, unless there is one so far. But by the time we were doing the study, we were asking our respondents, do you have a breastfeeding section? Other corporates have achieved that, right? Safaricom has that. Yes, so in our newsroom, our female journalists allowed to bring their babies along. I don't know how inconveniencing that can be, but that's a discussion we can float and actually deliberate on. There are few women in leadership positions. Actually, our CEO had pointed that across all regulatory platforms, even across the newsroom. So, the gender gap is narrowest in stories on science and health. But if you compare that with stories in news about politics and government, you realize that the gender gap is wide. What does this mean? It means when it comes to issues of science and health, women are covered more. So when you look at the coverage in terms of men, women, you find the gap is small. But when it comes to politics and news, men are covered more and women are covered less. That means the gender gap is big. So, this is what one of the respondents said. The reason why there are more men than women in most cases is perception that the hard work is culturally what? Male. Especially for the camera. And we were asking journalists, we were asking our respondents, we were asking especially the female, we were telling them, on average, how much, what is the weight of a video camera like that one? That is in accompaniment with the tripod, and they said it's between 6 to 10 kg. Is that right? 6 to 10 kg? Yes, together with a bag. And we were asking the female respondents, how many of you are comfortable carrying this while you are at work? That means you're trying to capture something and you still have other equipment and you can comfortably move around. And the women said, most of them said it would be difficult. Then we were now telling them, we were asking them now, if that is the standard camera that you would find in any average newsroom, would you want your employer to find lighter cameras or cameras that are more portable, that are female friendly, so to speak? And they said yes, but the question is how many employers are willing to go out of an extra mile to buy cameras that are female friendly? For them, it's about the balance sheet. By the end of the day, they wouldn't spend 200, 300,000 to buy a camera simply because they want it to be female friendly. So those are some of the issues, because some of these journalists are sometimes sent to cover riots. They are sent to, there is a day we witnessed sometimes this year where some journalists slept in some place in Kapedo, in Turkana. How many saw that? So if it's a female carrying such a camera, you know, Those are issues of logistics which probably bring out some of these challenges. When it comes to presenters, female television presenters slightly outnumber their male colleagues in the Kenya newsroom. And however, this is now based on the Gender Media Monitoring Program, the longitudinal. It says, however, the overall statistic in relation to presenters on radio and television is just below parity at 49%. So 41% of radio and 57% of television newscasters are presented by women. So apparently, globally, you find that women have a higher representation in terms of what? Presenters. So it's probably logical, or it's obvious in terms of even how our female journalists dress. Is it a soft affirmative action that more women are presenters compared to men, or is it because of an aesthetic value that they are presenters? Yes? Those are some of the issues we can discuss. So the journalistic gender lens in source selection is not only male-centered, but it's also skewed towards a certain kind of masculinity. So this one you look at in terms of expert opinion and ordinary person testimonies. Okay, from the TV stations you watch, what is the caliber of people who are called to give expert opinion? Are they necessarily people who are expert in those areas? If it's a male, you see, if it's a male, Jeff Koinange would not want to invite people who are timid in discussion. He actually invites, most of the people he invites are people who can articulate issues faster, better, clearer, people who are sharp in mind. And what does that do to other people who have probably good opinions? They'll not be invited to the bench. It's the same thing with our newsrooms. People who are called in to give expert opinion, what is the caliber of such people? And if you are using that kind of criteria to call in people, then how does it now affect the gender balance? Okay? So the recommendations here, we actually divided recommendations to media houses and to other stakeholders. And we're saying there's actually need to have gender policies in place. Even the small media houses, they should actually have gender policies. So for every 3 journalists employed, at least 1 should be a woman. Those are just simple policies that can be translated from legislative frameworks in the country to simple policies within the newsroom. Very simple. And you're saying special needs of women, especially those in field assignment, should be considered. I know the balance sheet matters, but in as much as is possible, some of these considerations should be put in place. Why not allow a female journalist to be accompanied by a male? Why not send a female journalist with probably a male reporter so that the male can help the female carry equipment? I don't know how practical that is. To other stakeholders, you're saying, engage the media on the importance of considering gender equality. And that is why we are actually grateful for UNESCO. And probably other institutions like Amwik should be empowered more. But you realize some of these things can never be realized until and unless we engage with the media owners. So thank you. Other findings, you will probably find them in the report if you have time to actually peruse through. So thank you so much. And we can now open the floor for discussion. Thank you so much.
Before discussions, now I invite Faith Kasiva from UN Women, who is a team leader, social economic development, for a few remarks, and she'll officially launch the report, and then we can have discussions.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Our host, the dean, the associate dean, actually, of the Aga Khan University School of Graduate School of Media and Communication. The CEO of, there he is, Dr. Aaron Mwangi, CEO of Media Council of Kenya. Development partners, my fellow colleagues from the UN system, I see UNDP here, I see UN Women here. Partners in the civil society that we have worked with. I want to recognize Kimbilio Trust. I want to recognize the Africa AWCF. I see the Executive Director, Arthur, here, and Jane Godia. And many civil society colleagues who are in the room, and representative of media houses. As we've heard, my name is Faith Kasiva. I work for UN Women, Social Economic Development Team Leader. It's really very humbling to participate in this launch, and we really want to thank the Media Council of Kenya for giving us this honor to launch this report. As a UN, we deliver as one. So I'm happy to note that UNESCO has been part of this conversation, and in the spirit of delivering as one, we are here from the UN family to represent all of us. On behalf of UN Women Kenya, we are very delighted to be part of this event on the launch of this report, Media Coverage on Gender Issues in Kenya. I'm happy to know that I'm in the midst of experts in media, so I won't belabor the point, but let me just say that we all know that media is one of the most powerful tools in modern world. It influences how we view men and women. Woven throughout our daily lives, media insinuate messages into our consciousness at every turn. All forms of media communicate images of sexes, many of which perpetuate unrealistic, stereotypical, and very, very limiting perceptions. Broadly speaking, there could be more, but we have three themes that describe how media represent gender. First, women are underrepresented, which falsely implies that men are the cultural standard and women are the unimportant or invisible. Second, men and women are portrayed in stereotypical ways that reflect and sustain socially endorsed views of gender. Third, depictions of relationship between men and women emphasize traditional roles and normalize violence against women. One of the very interesting debates that have happened in the recent past involves, and this is on social media, involves a TV anchor on Citizen TV who happens to be a friend. Let me just declare here. So she was expecting a baby, and for most of us, we knew she was pregnant, but the minute her pregnancy started showing, Twitter couldn't handle it. And it really goes to what Mr. Kibet was trying to say. What is it that we have constructed as an image, as a society, we want to see of a news anchor? I think these are difficult conversations, difficult dialogues that we may have internally as a media fraternity and even externally as a society. Mr. Kibet has alluded to the Global Media Monitoring Project 2015, which I'll touch a little bit, a few statistics. I hope I don't bore you, but I really want to recognize our partner AWCF, as I say, represented by Arthur or Kwemba, who has been participating in this report. The Global Media Monitoring Project 2015, the world's largest and longest running research and advocacy initiative for gender equality, in and through the news media, shows that the rate of progress towards media gender parity has almost ground to a halt over the past 5 years. The results, which again, Mr. Kibet has alluded to, shows that the worldwide women make up to 50% of the general population, but only 24% of the persons heard, read about, or seen in newspapers, television, and radio news, exactly the same level found in the 2010 report. The report further notes that political and crime news are two topics least reported by women in most regions. Again, and this was in Mr. Kibet's report, is that gender gap is narrowest in stories on science and health, and the major topics of the lowest importance on news agenda occupying only 8% of the overall news space. Women make up to 35% of people in news under this topic, in contrast to only 16% in political news. The gap is widest in news about politics and government, and we all know that. We in Kenya know that. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, these statistics are really very disturbing in the 21st century. Today we gather here to launch Gender Agenda Assessing Gender Issues in Kenyan Media report by the Media Council. The findings of this report mirrors the findings of the Global Media Monitoring Report Project 2015. Again, key among the findings is that despite progress made in gender representation in Kenyan media, men still dominate, and women suffer various atrocities, from sexual harassment to being deemed unfit for the manly journalistic assignments, including carrying a 10 kg camera, make it light for women, make the environment work for women. The report, which gives an in-depth analysis of how media has covered gender issues in the country, reveals that many media outlets operate without gender policies. Again, I know Mr. Kibet has alluded to that. We also need to move beyond gender policies. I know it's a first step, but yes, get the gender policies in place, but also fast track, accelerate the implementation. This is a very timely report, and we hope it will equip all media stakeholders with more information and understanding of gender issues in the Kenyan media. I really want to thank the Media Council of Kenya for this groundbreaking piece of work. Please let's applaud them. We in the UN family appreciate the work that you are doing, and we are in full support of this right step in the right direction towards achieving gender equality in the Kenyan media. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the Kenyan media has the potential to be an enabler of faster and more substantive gender equality and women's empowerment, or a barrier to it. Gender discrimination deprives media coverage of the balance and authority that diverse perspectives bring. Together, we have to challenge and change stereotypical perceptions of femininity and masculinity. On our part, as UN Women in Kenya, we will continue to play in our role in advancing gender equality and women's empowerment in Kenya through partnerships. We have a mandate, as you know, from the UN General Assembly to accelerate progress in meeting women's needs worldwide and as part of the UN reform agenda, bringing together resources and mandates for greater impact. We are committed to continue building partnerships to increase women's voice and leadership, increase access to opportunities and resources, and ending violence against women, a pandemic that is fueled by discrimination and sexual stereotyping. And for those of you who are in the gender world, you know that we are within the 16 days of activism. So this is really a very timely activity for the media fraternity as part of celebrating 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Ultimately, we are working towards a world where women and men, girls and boys are equal. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, there are ways in which women are depicted in media that have a profound effect on societal attitudes and reinforce traditional gender norms. Women and girls are half the humanity. Giving equal time and weight to their stories and featuring them as positives model, not victims, play an underappreciated part in creating a better, freer world for all of us. This report is a wake-up call to all the media houses, newsrooms, and stakeholders to close the gender gap in the media houses in Kenya. It is my sincere hope that we take time to read and internalize the findings of this report and follow through with the recommendation. Again, on behalf of UN Women in Kenya and the UN family, I want to assure all the stakeholders and the people of Kenya of our continued and steadfast support towards promoting gender equality and women empowerment. We wish to renew and affirm our commitment and collective resolve to live up to the ideals of the United Nations Charter in our work to support this country. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And I don't know whether it's at this point that I declare the report officially launched. Thank you very much.